Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I very much hope that this video finds you well and in very good spirits wherever you are in the world. And today, if you don't mind, I would very much like to continue on with the 31 days of cop films and gangster films from the years spanning from 1970 to the present day. So there's a lot to choose from, but let us focus today for this video on the police genre or the cop genre, or maybe to be more specific in the context of the film that I'd like to bring up now, the idea of law enforcement. This is a film from 1997. It is from the writer-director, the great, brilliant cinema artist who is Sidney Lumet. This is another Sidney Lumet film, and we have this story based upon the novel by Robert Daly. And it stars in its really great cast. People like Ron Liebman and Lena Olin and Richard Dreyfuss and Ian Holm, James Gandolfini, and starring Andy Garcia. And I'm speaking about this film, the work from 1997, which is Night Falls on Manhattan. Night Falls on Manhattan is a film that could be said in many ways to be in the sweet spot of Sidney Lumet's grand filmography. Sidney Lumet is a filmmaker whose various talents, I think, cover so many sweet spots. One such sweet spot can be said to be films about police and police corruption and the philosophy of law enforcement and questions about that, contemplations about that, and New York City, the vibe, the look, the feel, the atmosphere of New York, the ins and outs, as it were. So film like Night Falls on Manhattan is checking off those boxes in such, I think, wonderful and highly charged attention to detail that Sidney Lumet always gives in his great works. So Night Falls on Manhattan. I mentioned how it could be said to be focusing in on not just the police enforcement element, the police, but various organs of law enforcement in the context of New York. So we have the police, the role of the police officers and the gathering of evidence and the dangers and pitfalls and the risks that are associated with serving in the line of duty, especially when the potential for violent crimes can be had. And indeed we see that very intense and quite dangerous type of situation and circumstance emerge quite early on, which leads the film down the path of its very, I think, tightly plotted narrative from beginning to middle to the end. So that's one aspect or one organ of law enforcement that we see being explored here. And then another organ that we see being explored is that of the district attorney's office, trials, prosecutions, public prosecutors, and how the evidence needs to be collected and filed both pre-trial and indeed post-trial. And that's another interesting detail that emerges over the plot points of this film. And not just the district attorney side, but also the other side, the defense attorney side. And we see the setup of a trial situation involving a very high-profile crime. And in the context of this, we understand that Andy Garcia character, who's a young member of the district attorney's office, is having a very intense examination and inspection leading to trial. And that intensity is not just due to the high-profile nature of the case in question, but also because of the personal nature that he has invested. And it involves, too, his relationship with the police officers that are a part of the matter that is subject to this particular trial, and the police officers being played by the great James Gandolfini and the great Ian Holm. In particular, the relationship between the characters of Andy Garcia and Ian Holm, and that forms one of the impetus, one of the ways in which this film propels forward through its very interesting and engaging maze of contemplation about the actual about integrity in these various organs of law enforcement and what that means to various people. So this is the essential setup. So we have, therefore, this great, I think, setup and examination where we see many facets of the law enforcement engines, as it were, including the idea of trial, including the idea of rule of law, including the idea of the notion of confrontation, open trial confrontation between prosecution and defense, and the idea too of rights of the accused, etc., etc. And so that leads to this great, almost back and forth love-hate relationship, as it were, that emerges on both sides of the trial aisle, as it were, and then we get the great emergences of the maybe on-screen relationships between the characters played by Andy Garcia and, say, Richard Dreyfuss, which is a very, very fascinating and captivating relationship dynamic right there. And also on another level, we see yet another type of drama and personal and professional exploration taking place in the context of the relationship between Lena Olin's character and Andy Garcia's character as well. So there's a lot going on here. And to top it off, that's not all, because along the way, we see the nature of politics. We see the nature of the role of public perception and elections and public approval ratings and seniority rank within, say, the district attorney's office. And here we have the great Ron Liebman here and his fiery and brilliant screen presence. It's in many ways a type of show-stopping presence. It's wonderful. It's really wonderful performance. And so, but we, in that storyline, we also understand that there's a lot at stake. There's a lot at stake that makes the fundamental nature of the sort of philosophical purity of the pursuit of justice somewhat potentially blurred, somewhat potentially uneven, shaky. That philosophy might give way to cracks or fissures, or maybe perhaps those cracks were always there to begin with. It was just one didn't know about it until one gets into the weeds of law enforcement, the nitty gritty of what it means to pursue justice and what that actually means. Is it truly a simple case by the by, or is it more complicated than that? And in the hands of Sidney Lumet and company, we realize that yes, it is indeed more complicated than that. So this is the film Night Falls on Manhattan. So this is a film, I should say, that when it came out in '97, I went to see it in the movie theater. I was so excited when I heard about this film coming out, and when I saw it, you know, while I admit it might not necessarily be my absolute favorite Sidney Lumet film, because there are so many films to choose from, it might not necessarily top my top favorite Sidney Lumet films list. However, at even at that first viewing, I could still see the sincerity and earnestness of the character exchanges, and there is this type of drama that's unfolding that feels very, I think, very pure, or the pursuit of the examination of these questions felt and feels very pure. And that's because we understand that Sidney Lumet has this, or we feel that Sidney Lumet has this sincerity of what he's trying to say, the stories that he's trying to tell. And so it becomes this lovely, I think, examination. I think we will see maybe other examples in the Sidney Lumet canon, which might actually be discussed in later days of the 31 Days, where he will be doing similar things with a similar or almost identical subject matter to maybe varying degrees of, say, critical success and the like. And so maybe Night Falls on Manhattan, in terms of the overall critical trajectory and critical attention, might not necessarily reach, say, the heights of other great famed critical works from Sidney Lumet. So I understand that. However, again, on the basis of the earnestness of the storytelling, and also on the basis of the great rendering of the characters, and in particular the way in which Andy Garcia's character, the main character, Sean, how he is really interacting in a very it's a very earnest way, but also in a seemingly different way based on the characters that he is with at any given moment in time. So he seems to act in a very honest and earnest way, but still perceptibly somewhat slightly different depending on who he's with. And indeed, that might turn into something that becomes more Machiavellian and more motivated as he realizes that there is a political aspect to the idea of climbing the ladder and what that means and what kinds of choices or sacrifices that brings with it in terms of one's own family life, one's own personal life, and one's own personal view of oneself, and the choices that one makes internally, how that might or might not be affected in Sean's case, the Andy Garcia's character's case. So this is, I think, it has this, I think, lovely, direct and honest quality about it that I think makes it so enticing and so I don't know if charming is the right word, but I think it has that sense of an earnest quality that makes it a very compelling watch indeed. Very, very compelling indeed. And those character moments, those little character moments, I think also are what make it really shine. I mean, there's the character of played by Ron Liebman. And I remember when this film came out upon its release, Ron Liebman, the actor, actually appeared on a late night talk show as a guest, and he was speaking to promote the film Night Falls on Manhattan. And he's talking about a particular scene where his character is sitting down at a table and he's talking and talking, talking. Suddenly he slams his fist on the table, and then in the interview, I seem to recall that he revealed that during the scene where his character slams his fist on the table, like a fit of sort of intense, almost he loses his temper for a moment, and he reveals that on the set he actually injured his hand, and so his hand got so swollen up. I think the word he used at the time of the interview, the late night talk show interview, was that his fist became like a squirrel or something. So I was very impressed by that. It's a remarkable performance. It's one of the great highlights, in fact. And so he's like this ball of energy, this bolt of lightning. He's just bigger than life. And so that makes that also drives the point home too, that the idea of the district attorney is not just about justice, at least in the hands of these characters anyway. It doesn't seem just to be only about justice, but it's also about the public perception of what it is that justice is. And so that, I think, is really important detail, and one that I think is dwelled upon so well, and it's explored so well, especially in terms of the conceit and the bookmarking of this film, how this film is structured in terms of its prologue and its epilogue. I think that makes it, I think, very much an idea or an approach about the earnestness of the pursuit of justice, and how that is potentially besmirched, or how that integrity is maintained, depending on which characters we are talking about here, and depending on the circumstances, and depending on one's own worldview and outlook, and indeed how that worldview or outlook might also change along the way. So there is so much going on here, so much great potential, and it's, I think, a hidden gem in the filmography of Sidney Lumet, especially in the context of exploration of police law enforcement in New York City. So I think it's well worth it if you haven't seen it already. So please check it out if you can. Night Falls on Manhattan. I should say too that it was a film that I saw in the theater, and I seem to recall it was not a packed theater. It was fairly empty, actually. So I don't know if it enjoyed that much critical or commercial success, but it was, I thought, at the time it was compelling, and even now I find it so very compelling in terms of the questions. And I'm much older, and at the time in '97, there are many concepts and aspects of law that were unclear to me, and even now, many years after the fact. And there are some aspects that are that are not so clear to me right now, but I think that with a little bit more education under my belt in terms of legal concepts and legal principles, I really have come to appreciate this film even more, because I think it deals with this idea of um, a type of aspirational goals fresh out of law school, and also deals with this notion of how those aspirational goals are affected when one is in the field, working in public, say district attorney's office, or working in public office. Versus working in private practice, and there's also this idea of the law firm culture or law firm mentality that is also, I think, in a nuanced way expressed in this film so well. And there's also the idea too, on the other side, how the practice of law does have certain ramifications or potential with regard to running for elected office as well. So those aspects, I think, are expressed so well and so sincere. And also the idea of evidence, the idea of gathering evidence, and what's called, the phrase that's often used is quote unquote tainted evidence. But the idea or notion here is how evidence is gathered, how a warrant needs to be acquired in order to, with the concept or in the connection of this idea of police inspection and probable cause, and warrants issued from duly issued from, say, judges with appropriate jurisdictional authority, as may or may not be the case in certain aspects of Night Falls on Manhattan. But those details, I think, are actually very key to the plot intrigue of the film. And so maybe those details, I think, when I was, as I say, in when this film was released many years ago, those details, I admit, went over my head. And while I admit even now that I don't have a grasp over all the details that are discussed in the film, I think over the course of time, and with a little bit of a better understanding of what these specific aspects are in terms of the practice of law, and also the mechanisms and the requirements of certain police procedure under, say, the instruments of things like the Bill of Rights and the U.S. Constitution and the like. This film and the discussion of it is, I think, should be applauded for its attention to detail as well. I mean, it hinges on, I think, really specific technicalities of law enforcement procedure and constitutional procedure and evidence law. So that I think is it's something that might be it might be difficult to translate off of the screen into the viewership or the audience. But I think this film does so well, and as I say, it has this great earnest approach that it's really focusing in on these details. But at the same time, it does it in a way that is, I think, very easy to access, easy to understand, easy to process, given at a given moment. And then later, one realizes upon further examination of these principles of law and principles of legal procedure and police procedure, that indeed the issues that are on display here are actually quite fundamental to the notion of rule of law and the practice of law, and indeed they go to the very question, the heart of the question of what it means to have integrity in the pursuit of justice. This is the film Night Falls on Manhattan. Okay, my dear friends, so that's it for now. And so until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well. And please keep on watching a lot of great movies. Thank you so much, as always, for your time. I very much appreciate it. Stay strong, stay safe, and cheers.